This video is going to show a nice application of list comprehension. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to find all of the columns in this data frame, okay, from this stock exchange index data, all of the columns that are numeric. So let me just look at what this data frame looks like. So these first two columns are not numeric, but the rest of them are. And so if I check df.dtypes, and there's no great way for you to predict in advance, like should there be parentheses after the name or not. Just something you have to get used to. This kind is called an attribute. This kind is called a method. Okay, methods are like functions. So when I see object for the data type, what I usually think is string, even though there are some other possibilities that would also be called object in pandas. And these floats, float is like a real number, like a decimal number. So that's what the float part stands for. So, I mean, if I wanted, I can just look at it and say, okay, these 6 are the numeric columns. What's a programmatic way to get that list? Okay, get the list from open to volume. So you'll see that I imported this special function here called isNumericDtype. And let me show you an example of how that works. So if I look at df open, this open column, this gives me a pandas series, and we can see that its data type is a float here. And if I check isNumericDtype, hey, and then I get true. Whereas if I go to one of the ones that is not numeric, like the name column, then I get false here. So what I want to do is I want to iterate through all of the different column names, and for each of them, I want to keep it if it's a numeric column. So let me first show a couple ways to iterate over those columns. So I could do df.columns, and so this is what's called a pandas index, which is some special data type defined by pandas that we're not going to, like, we will use them, but we don't have to think too much about, like, what's the difference between that and a list. If I wanted, I could convert it into a list like this. But this method here of wrapping it inside the word list, that isn't very flexible. Like, there isn't a way for me to change this in any interesting way. So instead, let me show you the list comprehension way. So I could say C, that's going to be an arbitrarily chosen variable name for when I'm iterating through the index. So C will first be equal to name, then C will be equal to date, and so on. So C for C in df.columns. So this is like the list comprehension way to get this same list up here. And so from this, you can't see an advantage. Another list comprehension way that I've heard is better, but I'm not in the habit of using it, is to wrap this thing, which is called a generator, inside of list. So here are 3 different ways to make the same list. But let me go to this one with the square brackets on the outside. And as an example of what we can do, I can say, give me the length of C for C in df.columns. And so don't think that C is going to be something like the 3rd column in the data frame. Instead, you should think that C is going to be something like this string high. So like, what is this corresponding to? Well, the word name has 4 letters in it. So that's why the length, len, of that string is 4. So that's where this 4 comes from. On the other hand, this adjusted close, including the space, has 9 characters in it. So that's where this 9 comes from. And so what do I want to do? Well, like as an example, let's just keep the columns if the length is 4. So give me C for C in df.columns if length of C is equal to 4. Okay, so there is an example, but that's not what I care about. What I care about is the column that corresponds to this, is it a numeric D type? So let's take an example like this. And so that had a true or false output. Just like this, length C equals 4 has a true false output. And so let's put this in here. So that gave me an empty list. Why is that? Well, it's because notice that C is not occurring in here, my variable C. So this is always using name. And for name, that was always false. It was not a numeric D type because it contained object as its D type. So what should I replace here? Like, what should I replace with the C? If you try replacing this whole thing with C, okay, that's also not going to work. Okay, well, why is that? Well, it's asking, is something like open, is that a numeric D type? Okay, but that's not what I want. Instead, what I want is this column corresponding to C a numeric D type? Does it have a numeric D type? And here is exactly the list of column names that I was trying to create.